Well, I think AI makes me more human in terms of understanding that the nirvana or the ultimate achievement is not to be perfect. The ultimate achievement is to be authentic, to be present, to kind of be yourself. I guess be kind of exist on this human dimension, which is I think one of the things you realize is that when something's too perfect, whether it's your selfie or whether it's something that you write, people start to distrust it. Right now, if I design something or I write something and it sounds so fluent and flawless, without accent and without pauses and mistakes, then I think people will suspect it's not Siok. It's actually the digital twin of Siok. One question which people ask me and ask themselves is, how has AI made me more aware of what it means to be human?
Welcome to Analyse Asia, the premier podcast dedicated to dissecting the pulse of business, technology, and media in Asia. I'm Bernard Leong, and how do we navigate in the age of AI? With me, Tan Siok Siok, author of AI for Humanity, Building a Sustainable AI for the Future, where we talk about where we are in the state of AI today and how humans will navigate in the future. Welcome back, Siok Siok. I think it's been a very long time since we last spoke.
Yeah, it feels like a century because since we last spoke, there's been a once in a century pandemic. There've been a few wars that have broken out. So I think and also, by the way, I remember I told you that I got a cold email from someone in the US thinking that I have great potential as a podcast guest and offering to represent me because they heard the interview long ago between you and me. So I hope that I will live up to my potential during this conversation.
Well, at that point in time, I do remember we were talking about one of the documentary you were working on, which was Twittermentary. Today, we will call Twitter as X or whichever the case is. Since our last conversation, it has almost been a decade. And to be quite honest, I think it was only a few days ago I just celebrated the 10 years of Analyse Asia podcast by itself. So we overestimate what we can achieve in 1 year, but we grossly underestimated what we could achieve in a decade. So maybe just what have you been up to over that past decade? There was a pandemic, wars.
Well, congratulations on the 10th anniversary of Analyse Asia. Podcasting is very hard. So I really admire you for persisting. Well, I think during the decade since we last spoke, however many years, I was published in China because of my photography. Some people might know that I take a lot of iPhone photographs in a black and white nostalgic style of the Beijing hutongs. And I started posting on social media. I think when I started, I didn't think of myself as a photographer at all. I was just experimenting with iPhone, mobile photography, Chinese social media. But surprisingly, I got a following. So I was signed by an agent, which is quite insane thing for an iPhone photographer to say. And then I published 2 books, one of which collaboration with novelists, and it won a big prize in China. It's called the Lucian Literary Prize, one of the highest literary prizes in China. And recently, that particular book called Beijing City in Time, Beijing Chengyu Nian, was translated into Arabic and was part of a big book fair in the UAE. The other major development is that I moved from China back to Singapore after more than a decade away in Beijing. It was not planned because I just happened to be in Singapore when the pandemic broke out. So I just ended up staying. As life unfolds, I just ended up staying and for the first time in a long time consider remaining in Singapore.
And I was about to get you on the podcast, but you told me to hold back a bit because you're writing a book on AI, which was also to my surprise as well. But before we get to the main subject of the day, I still want to ask, what life lessons now would you share from your experience over the past decade? I mean, being in China and with your work going through all over the world, whether it's the very famous documentary Boomtown, Twittermentary, your photography book. It seems like you have achieved much more than I did over the last 10 years. What are the life lessons you can share with my audience?
Well, I think it's to make uncertainty your friend. Growing up in Singapore, I think we feel like we have to be responsible for everything and control everything. But I think what the pandemic and the past few years have taught me, what I've learned is that life has different seasons that go beyond our planning. So I think what's revelatory was that during the pandemic, when I ended up back in Singapore, I think for the first time I relaxed, ironically, because I realized that for the first time I realized that I really don't have control over this. Let's just relax and lie down for a while and take what comes, right? So I think that's one thing. The second thing I feel is to flow with your community, right? And to contribute to it. Because I think it's also contrary to the whole idea of planning and having fully formed ideas that you put out in the world. So I think whether it's our conversation today or whether it's the AI book, just came with just exploration with your friends, bonding with a community, listening and offering to help. So I think that's one thing I learned is there's no need to know everything. There's no need to see so much further in the future, but just flow with your community, be a friend to everyone, and try to help them be more successful. And the other thing I feel is whatever you think you cannot imagine, you can. I cannot imagine that I will be back in Singapore. I couldn't have imagined I will be a co-author of an AI book. I couldn't have imagined that we will have conversations, you and I, like a decade apart almost, right? And that you would have persisted with Analyse Asia for 10 years. So you can imagine it and you can reimagine it. I think that's a hopeful message, I think.
I guess we are going to get to the main subject of the day is you've written an AI book. I myself have worked in AI probably for the last 30 years, starting when I was a theoretical physicist as such. Maybe the book is AI for Humanity, Building a Sustainable AI for the Future. I think you are one of the co-authors together with Andy Ma, James Ong, who I happen to actually know, and yourself. So I guess maybe the best way to start is to help my audience. Let's just baseline a bit. What would you define AI, machine learning, generative AI, specifically for today's the layman out there?
Yeah, here's a secret. I am a layperson. So when I saw your question, I panicked. It's like, oh no, Bernard's asking me a question. It's like a test. You know how we always as Asians, we always think about prepping for tests. Well, I think full disclosure, I'm not an AI expert. I did not become one simply because I co-author a book about AI. I always say that I'm not an AI expert, only play one on Zoom. And we happen to be on Zoom now, right? So I think my understanding of AI is really that it's not any one thing. It's really a group of technology or it's this endeavor of technologists or scientists and entrepreneurs to mimic human intelligence using machines, right? It's really very complex because different people have different theories about what is foundational in terms of human intelligence. And I think as for machine learning and generative AI, I think one important thing I learned from researching and writing the book is really not to obsess over the current trend or buzzwords because it will come and go, right? So I think what I understand is that there are different hypotheses about what is human intelligence and how can we best make machines mimic or imitate or surpass human intelligence. And you have different schools of thoughts that have gained dominance. So I think machine learning and generative AI more belongs to the school of what they call connectionists, which is really not to intelligence explicitly with rules, but rather to learn from data. So, and that has been on the rise in the past decade or so, but it doesn't mean that it'll always be. So I think even with generative AI being kind of the buzzword, I think in recent years, we have to be cautious because we don't know what we don't know about AI and we don't know what we don't know about what it means to be human and to be intelligent and to be wise as a human being. Yeah.
So I guess maybe what was the inspiration behind the book and how do you put together the book? Probably I assume that two of your other authors are fluent in AI as well, right?
Yeah. The one very important thing to know is that we started writing the book before the launch of OpenAI's ChatGPT. So we started actually earlier in 2022. So it wasn't inspired by ChatGPT or generative AI or large language models. I think it was really much more innocent than that. We were not so clever to predict that ChatGPT will go viral and there will be this iPhone moment and everyone will realize, oh, AI is something that we need to pay attention to. I think it's actually the beginning was quite innocent, which is really that Andit is a AI governance expert, and James Ong is actually trained in, he has a PhD in AI from University of Texas in Austin. And they were collaborating on a book about AI because they can see the risk and the potential and they want to share their expertise. And I came into the picture just because, for a very mundane reason, which is that the lockdown during the pandemic ended, and I had lunch with James, who is a longtime friend of mine, and I very innocently asked, "Oh, what are you working on?" He said, "I'm writing a book with an AI risk expert." Then I asked the kind of question, the destiny question. I said, "How can I help?" Then I said, "Oh, I published 2 books before," failing to remind him that they were books of photography and they were in Chinese. So it's not about AI, it's not English, it's not nonfiction. So I think the whole quest was really very simple, which is to explain the risks and potential AI to a general audience. It was interdisciplinary because we thought that actually bring different people together will give a more holistic picture of what AI means to different people. So it was very innocent. We were not really plotting some sort of conquest of the world or some sort of thing like that. But then ChatGPT launched early in the process of writing it. And then it's one of those things where you're not sure whether it's the best thing that can happen to your book or the worst thing that can happen to your book. Because what happens is then that everything is evolving so rapidly and AI was in the headlines daily. And therefore, like we were trying to capture something like lightning in a bottle, right? You can never keep up because every day there's news, there's new research, there's panic, there's so that's the origins of the book, I think.
Now it's going to be even harder because I teach AI now in the university, National University of Singapore, to both the business school and the Institute of System Science. And then just to even keep up with the latest things that are going on. And plus, I'm working on a startup myself, and AI is pretty much overbearing. I guess when you're writing the book before ChatGPT, I think it was quite quiet, and then suddenly everything just starts coming together. Who are the intended audience for this book then?
Yeah, I think the caveat is, the one question I have for you, Bernard, is what do you find, because you're teaching AI as well to a non-technical audience, like
Technical and both non-technical.
what's the hardest thing to explain about what's happening with AI? Because you have the same conundrum that we confronted, right? It was really one of the most stressful things to ever contemplate. Like, what is the biggest thing that you think people don't understand, don't get about AI?
I think the hardest part is probably when you're trying to explain to them the traditional ways of things that people do in computer science or the digital applications, is that there's an input and then you give it some instructions and then it generates an output. When you think about things like artificial intelligence, you think
Right.
about the data tries to find you a set of rules, and through the set of rules you put in new data and you see whether it gives you the same output that the data originally intended with the model. And because of that, there's of course a kind of probabilistic output might come out. Is it yes or no? It could be that, is it a cat or not a cat? I think that's very easy to define now. But maybe if someday some very new breed comes out, the AI doesn't really know, right? So how do you help the AI to get better at it? This is where most of the laymen would find that difficult. I think what is much more difficult to explain to them now, I think I'm probably one of the few people who say it, hallucination is a feature, not a bug. And I think people keep thinking hallucination is
I
bad.
agree.
Yeah, right. So the other part that is literally difficult is to try to think about hallucination from the point of view that actually what you really need to do to implement generative AI is to try to constrain as much hallucination as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do agree with you. I think because hallucination is the feature of the probabilistic calculations, right? So because it is calculating probabilities, this giant calculator of probabilities, therefore you will have whole range of outcomes, right? Both what you think is correct and also those that are on the outer ranges of the probability. And I think what's interesting in terms of the tension is that when you make the AI more safer and more obedient, sometimes it becomes less interesting, because sometimes the interesting thing about AI is how it surprises you and how it might make you think in a totally unexpected way. And therefore, I think it's a challenge for people to learn, because I think we think of programming as like we give explicit instructions to computers and they will execute on instructions. So when the AI is unpredictable or give us a range of outcomes, I think we don't know how to cope with it, I think. But as a creative person, like, I find that to be the most fascinating part of AI. In fact, what I find interesting is that I always look out for, oh, let's say if AI came up with 7 key bullet points. I always look out for the 1 or 2 that surprises me, and I say, oh, can you talk about point 3 and point 5 and expand on it, because I don't understand how do you come up with that. So I think it's also a different expectation and philosophy and all that with regards to AI, I think. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest changes that if you think about AI today, is that it used to be communicated all using mathematical language. I think one of the beauty of generative AI or ChatGPT is the ability to use very natural syntax language to communicate with a black box that's able to generate things that sounds very human-like, but it's actually only a reflection of what the data that is being trained in, which is all human data pre-2021, or what we call the age of human-made internet. And then I think from now on, it's age of maybe synthetic plus human data after that.
Yeah, I think you're very insightful in saying that, right? And of course, being someone who's not very good at math, but very good with languages, is a great gift for me, right? Because I think I can be very precise in terms of how I prompt the AI and how I want it to change or calibrate the outcomes. And I think one thing I realized is that, well, my friends put it very well, which is that the hottest programming language now, because of generative AI, is really English or Chinese or whatever language you happen to speak, Bahasa Indonesia. And so it means that everyone can be a technologist, right? If you can express very clearly what you would want the AI to do for you or in collaboration with you. So it's great news for me, because I was not very good at math, but I'm very good at telling people and machines what I want.
Yeah, then that comes to the other part, right? So for you now, you can actually interact with a system that can more or less generate what you want to see. How do you find it as a creative then? Do you find it like it helps you to expand the scope of work, or maybe you may want to be some creators who are extremely purist and say, no, I don't want anything that's generated by AI because it is actually remixing 1,000 artists' different form of art into one form. So I think for artists like you, how do you all think about the generative capability of AI then?
I think for me, it's a great question. I think that I'm not representative of creative and artists per se. For a lot of my friends, my peers, and whether they're in content creation, filmmaking, design, marketing, there's a great fear, right? Because I think they fear that AI or AI technology will displace them, right? And you already see some beginnings of some of that, where jobs are people are being replaced by AI models. People are being laid off. Some agencies, marketing agency, production companies are losing contracts and projects. So I think it's a very sober moment. However, I'm quite open and excited about it. I think mainly because I think that, to me, I don't use AI. I don't focus on using AI for automation or efficiency. I think of AI as like my sparring partner or my player coach. So if you imagine that I'm competing in the Olympics, I'm playing across opposite an AI model or AI partner, and I think that helps me up my game very quickly. So I think, to me, that's exciting thing, not the automation or the generation, but the augmentation and the kind of collaboration.
A lot of people are actually quite curious. I teach a whole wide range of people from private sector, mostly government agencies. I find that they're genuinely curious about AI and how it can help them. I guess the question that always come from them is replacing their jobs. And I find that argument too early to say, because I think there was a very good study that was done by the rest of world.org. So they had this, what happened was that you probably know that there is these things, image designers that are masters at Photoshop. These are people who live in Bangladesh, India, Philippines, working on Fiverr, Upwork, etc. per project type situation. So when generative AI came out, people with Midjourney, these people's jobs will suddenly disappear. And a lot of them lost the capability. But what the study showed was after a few months, they came back into the platform, but now they call themselves image prompt engineers. And then they went to generate the prompt and then they touch up the image, which was still required, even whether whatever the image is. So my question is that so-called displacement and augmentation of the jobs, how would you, from your perspective, think about it with your co-authors? I know you all talk a lot about are we really ready to mitigate the risk of human level AI? So why don't we just start from the angle and think about the displacement of jobs?
I think displacement of job is very real. I think that I was surprised by the extent of it because I've been promoting the book and I've been talking to people. However, I think your observation is very astute, which is that there's this cycle, right? In the beginning, people had this fear and they feel that they're being replaced. But then they realize that actually humans are still needed in the loop, in the workflow. So I think one of the things that we advocate for in the book is to make a shift from human versus AI to a human with AI, right? Because most of the news stories that you hear or read about is really about how, oh, AI is so much better than humans at chess and Go. They score higher in the law exam, the bar exam, etc. But I think what is more productive is actually think about human with AI, right? Which is really about which is your image prompt engineering example, right? Previously they had to do it manually, but they realized that actually they can do it better in a shorter time and maybe fetch a higher price if they know how to do prompt and AI model. Because I think for us, for me, I agree with you. I think in the sense that we're at the beginning of the cycle, and also to remind everyone that we're at a cycle when the global economy is on the downturn, right? So we're seeing the cost cutting and the displacement, but with time, I think with as people realize that actually they can create greater value with AI instead of being replaced by AI, I think that we're going to see new job titles like image prompt engineering and many other possibilities. So I think that we need to allow time for things to play out. But I think also that's why I think we advocate for human AI symbiotic intelligence, right? Which is really that you should really think about, if you look at a workflow, instead of saying automation, machines do everything, you need to think about what about if we break it down to human machine, human AI, where the human actually will be able to direct, curate, command, guide, nurture the AI model, right? So the simple example is what you say about prompt engineering with images, but there are many other examples, whether it's, for example, drug discovery, right? Or wildfire prediction, etc., where the humans is really like an engineer, right? Using plain English because they don't need to know math or complicated programming languages anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and here's a pretty interesting point, right? I think you mentioned Go just now, and I think that the actual better application of it is that you're training better Go players now, because I think now for China and South Korea, the best players are no longer playing against their fellow players, they're playing against the AlphaGo to basically improve their capability. One of the things that I find when you mentioned the point about AI seems to be beating human, actually it's also upping our level as such. I will point it out in this way, right? If you look at the fourth game between Lisador and AlphaGo, he did beat the AI. He actually came out with a God move in there. So just to help everyone out there, a God move is basically a move that will change the entire trajectory of the game, going from a losing situation to a winning situation. And in history for Go, God moves are very rare. The fact that he was being trashed 3 times and realized that he was very ashamed of losing the game, and it really opened him up and became, I think ever since that game, he has never lost to any player anymore. And I think even for the other European player who was helping to train the AI, also became very good at the game after they play against the AI. And I think in the documentary, it did highlight that. So what I'm saying here is that wouldn't the AI is actually better to actually take us to the next level rather than we fearing that it will take over our job?
Yeah, I think you're right. In fact, our chapter 8 in our book opened with a story about how a Go player managed to beat a AI model. That player was being coached by an AI model. It's human with AI versus AI, right? So I think the interesting thing for me and the exciting thing for me is really that that's why I use the metaphor analogy of player coach, right? So if I'm competing in Olympics, if I'm playing against like someone who's a former Olympic champion, I'm going to improve so much more quickly. But imagine if it's not just one player coach, it's like hundreds of them or thousands of them, millions of them. So I think that's an opportunity. The short-term shock, however, as we know, is that we are both based in Singapore, which is a very small market. So in a very small market, the problem is that the market is very shallow. So most people are actually in the lower middle tier in terms of budget and expectations in terms of skill. So that's where the danger is in terms of automation, right? But if I were, for example, based in Hollywood, right, where I can go from $5,000 a project to $500 million a project or $50 million a project, then I can actually have a lot of room to play. I can quickly go from 500,000 to 5 million, right? Because I'm using AI in my work. So there will be short-term pain, but I think the thing that it requires us to do is imagine what it means to play at a global level or world level with the help of AI, right?
Yeah.
Especially for people in smaller markets and in developing economies, I think.
Yeah, but we live in Singapore. We have no choice but to adhere to the global market, right? I don't think my call starts at 4 a.m. because I'm talking to friends in the US working in deep AI and not talking to people around my community where a lot of them are just developing APIs with the current solutions that are available. But I guess globalization has also allowed the sharing of information is quite free flow. You can definitely be as good as anyone in the world. It's just a question of upskilling. One of the things that I think is not very appreciated at the moment is that actually AI has the capability of upskilling people much better than they think that it would be. But I think we talk a lot about the replacement of jobs. Maybe I want to talk about the risk of the doomsday AI problem that everyone's been talking to me. I'm not what that view is. As someone would ask me, is like, when do you know we will see artificial general intelligence? I say, I know it when I see it. But even to today, I don't think that AGI is even close. So
How do you define AGI for you?
so essentially for me, AGI has to has the ability to reason. More than that, it has to have the ability to synthesize and create new knowledge. We haven't got to there yet. I think what it does is, okay, a lot of people wonder, why is it that a lot of theoretical physicists like myself ended up working in AI? So essentially what usually happens is that a lot of us study a lot of higher dimension physics using tensors. Okay, it's a mathematical object. And this is, you heard the word tensor flow, all these words flowing into the machine. They all came from physics. And essentially what those mathematical frameworks that they use is actually allow you to generate the space of all possibilities. And so hence, some of them are hallucinations, as you have already observed, but some of them could be new insights that you have not seen before. But you still need a human to validate it.
That's
Or
right.
the experiment to validate it. It's the same with physics as well. We can generate as much insights with string theory physics, but we still have to go and look for the experimental signatures to say, is this real or not? So where I thought that for AGI, to just get back to it, is that once whatever the AI model is able to reason, was able to have functions that's capable of making decisions by itself and not by what it observes from human, I think that is where we see AGI. But there are different definitions. I'm more closer to the Google definition of AGI because it's a far more complex way of thinking about it than the OpenAI one. In fact, the OpenAI's definition of AGI is just level 2 of Google's AI. It's just basically agents are able to perform functions, perform reasoning. I don't think we are there yet. I actually think that a lot of it is still we're just dealing with reflection of ourselves. Yeah.
I think that's a good point. In fact, that's what we talk about in chapter 2, the AI trap, which is really that we're actually unaware of how we're projecting ourselves into the AI models, the kind of the infinite mirror of ourselves and different versions of ourselves in the AI model. For me, as you know, I spent many years in China. For me, artificial general intelligence, one of the challenges is that we are discounting geopolitics, right? We're discounting the fact that there are different interpretation of what the reality, truth, what is general intelligence, right? So I think what you will see is that we're not going to have this one giant model of general intelligence that cover the entire 7 billion people on planet Earth, but rather you're going to have different models of reality, different models of intelligence, right? So I think that's one obstacle or barrier that we are not taking into account, right? That all those human factors in terms of politics, in terms of economics, in terms of sociology will come into play. So one of the things I find very interesting is that in terms of, for example, if you prompt two different models, one that is China based and the other one is US centric, and you ask them about the same world event, whatever it may be, a war, a pandemic, whatever it may be, you get two different set of answers. Truth, reality, intelligence is much more complex than we are considering right now, right? It's not just calculation, it's not just accuracy.
Yeah. But it's physical abstraction of something that you can represent in reality, right? Like for example, justice is an abstract concept. But law is not actually reflects everything about justice. Law is just a representation in reality that can capture most of what justice means. If you think from that aspect, it's the same with AI as well, right? Because AI is an abstract concept, but the perception that can be created in reality today is machine learning, and it requires data. I think you hang out with most of the top technologists in China, in Beijing, and I know if I could, I think a lot of my audience don't realize that if they talk to you more, you probably can lead them to all the most powerful founders of Chinese tech companies in Beijing. But one question that really came out to me was, since you know, Lee Careful talks about AI superpowers, and the shock of it is that China didn't invent ChatGPT, the Americans did, right? And I pieced together part of that story. And my sense at the moment is the Chinese didn't miss it. It's just that the culture doesn't allow because they were thinking of resource constraints. Google also didn't miss it because they thought that it was too dangerous. What are your thoughts like? If you have like different LLMs in different, then we will have very different perceptions of what truth means. Because I've been having difficulty trying to get access to LLM in China. I tested every LLM I can find. But to actually try any of the Chinese LLM, I actually have to borrow a number from my Chinese students that I teach in class. Is they can show me how the Baidu LLM works, how the Hunyun LLM works for Ali or Tencent, just to see how a Chinese LLM would look at the same question with a very different perspective.
Yeah, you're correct. To ignore the competing models of AI I think what we forget is that truth is very complex, right? Truth involves morality, philosophy, history, permission structures, social, cultural factors. So I think the thing that this whole idea of AGI, this one model, this general intelligence model that will be applied to everyone, I think is premature. Maybe one day it'll be realized, right? But the reality is that all the human factors will come into play, which is really, for example, everyone will want to define their sense of what is factual, what is reality. Take a very simple example of fact checking. I think if you're a pure technologist, you're thinking, how can I be most accurate? But there's actually a lot of ideology and judgment call and your interpretation of reality that comes into play in terms of fact checking. So, for example, we just saw the US presidential debate, right? So we don't have the same interpretation what's factual, right? And that's kind of explains in a nutshell the challenge of when we say we want to have a general intelligence model.
But then factual, and is it because that we are now in a postmodernist world that everything is relative? I don't subscribe to that. I'm actually very Immanuel Kant that there is a categorical imperative to everything, right? The postmodernist view is truth is actually relative, but you can't be completely relative all the way. There must be some common baseline that you have to agree. Whatever we say in the US presidential debates, right? It doesn't, the truth itself, like the factual of that matter is still there, right? What I agree with you is that, yes, no one can actually pin down what AGI is, but I think at least there should be some aspects of that you can capture that is pragmatic and that it can be implementable on there. But I think the other question, if I want to bring it back, is that do you think we are in the doomsday scenario situation?
I don't think so at all. If there's a doomsday scenario, we cannot blame it on AI. I think we always assume that we can blame it on AI as the evil force, right? And I think that's the problem in a sense that when we see our our agency to machines, I think in a way we're not being responsible, right? I think for me, the whole idea of the book AI for Humanity and the whole idea of responsible AI is that we need to restore a sense of agency to us human beings. We need to feel that this is not something that's happening to us, right? It's something that we are actually directing, curating, guiding, nurturing. This doomsday scenario is as though that, oh, it's something external, like natural disaster or something, a wildfire or something that is happening to us. But we need to remember that many natural disasters have human causes as well. It's because of our actions, our lack of awareness, our lack of accountability. So I think the very important thing about doomsday scenario is that the biggest threat is not AI. The biggest threat is our own lack of awareness, our own lack of ability to communicate with one another and to negotiate and to collaborate and to understand. We need to get some perspective on it, right? It's easier for human beings to destroy humanity, to destroy one another, than for AI to become sentient and take over the world, right?
So then what is the one thing that now you know about AI that very few do then?
Well, I think the one thing that I know about AI that very few people do is what you referred to, which is it is one of the tools for me to attain higher levels of awareness, intelligence, and wisdom. Where I think of AI as a sparring partner, a player coach, someone that you can play against, right? So the whole thing, you refer to the example of Go, right? How actually Go players become better because they play against AI. The thing about AI is that they can simulate hundreds of games, thousands of games, hundreds of thousands of games, millions of games in very rapid iteration. So I think what I know about AI is that it can make me better. At the same time, I need to have the wisdom to guide it or nurture it, right? In terms of, I need to be able to tell AI or guide AI as to what I really desire and want out of it. I tell my creative friends who are panicking about AI taking their job, which is that the one thing that AI does is that it leaves us all naked. So previously, when there are a lot of technical barriers for editing and transcription and content creation, we can always say that we don't have time to spend on originality and insightful analysis and all that. But now, because the technical barrier has fallen, thanks to AI, we can immediately show how good or bad we are. And I think that's actually quite shocking for a lot of people, right? So if you're a bad writer, AI will make you worse. If you're a good writer, AI can make you a great writer. So essentially, we need to become better. And we also need to become better in terms of not just on our own human terms, but in terms of our skills to guide AI, nurture AI, constrain AI. I think.
So what is the one question that you wish people would ask you about AI that very few do?
What was one question?
Since you've gone to so much book tours and people ask you questions, right? But then there's just like this one question they want to ask you, and then and then he's like, why is this question never being asked to me?
No, I think the one question I wish that people ask about AI is, how does AI make us more human?
Yeah, so now I'm going to ask you the question then.
Right.
How does AI make you more aware? How to make you more human then?
Well, I think AI makes me more human in terms of understanding that the nirvana or the ultimate achievement is not to be perfect. The ultimate achievement is to be authentic, to be present, to kind of be yourself. I guess be kind of exist on this human dimension, which is, I think one of the things you realize is that when something's too perfect, whether it's your selfie or whether it's something that you write, people start to distrust it. Right now, if I design something or I write something and it sounds so fluent and flawless, without accent and without pauses and mistakes, then I think people will suspect it's not Siok. It's actually the digital twin of Siok, right? So I think one thing, the way that AI makes me, one question that which people ask me and ask themselves is, how has AI made me more aware of what it means to be human?
You sound like my editor. You know why? Because 90% of the time I told him, go to the script and delete all the ums and ahs, and he's going to come back to me and say, don't, that will make you sound very not human. Then I'm like, but my listeners want that 20, 30 minutes of wasted time. So can you just make it that is that constant making people human?
No, I think it's also how, I think the pauses, the what we call the liminality, the
Or the
in
filler
between,
words.
the pauses, the accent, like we're both Singaporeans, so the lingering Singlish accent. I think the flaws and the imperfections and the vulnerability is what makes us human. You are beginning to see that, for example, in marketing and content creation, I think people are becoming more suspicious of something that's too perfect or too generic. I spent a lot of time in China. So China has perfected the art of AI image editing. So like you take anyone, they can make your complexion seem perfect. You have no wrinkles. You look perfectly symmetrical. But the thing is that what we'll find is that the definition of beauty, the definition of intelligence, the definition of originality will shift because perfection will become a defining feature of beauty. Our hesitation, our vulnerability, our sense of uncertainty will become the hallmark of wisdom. I think that's what we need to embrace, right? I think we've always celebrated intelligence in the sense of like a bigger brain, being able to think faster and analyze more clearly and calculate numbers, etc. But that's because we have been comparing ourselves to other animals, right? But we've long kind of become the apex of the animal kingdom, so to speak. But now, if we're comparing ourselves, our benchmark is AI and machine intelligence, then all the other qualities becomes much more valued, right? The wisdom, the uncertainty, the vulnerability, the empathy, the emotional intelligence, all these things that over the years we have very disparagingly labeled as soft skills, right? Like we always think that women have great soft skills for some reason. We listen, we collaborate. But I think that what will happen is that what we'll celebrate will shift away from all these very measurable things to all these intangible qualities that make you like someone or make you trust someone or make you want to collaborate with someone.
That looks like a pretty good point, and that comes to my traditional closing question. What would
Yeah.
great look like for you if the book have achieved its correct outcome?
Well, I think what great will look like is that anyone who happens to read the book or come to one of our events or listen to this podcast will feel that they can do something about AI, right? They don't have to be an expert. They have to know how to program or anything. Is that they get what it's about and they can do something to shape and define the future. I think what has happened with all this fear and kind of exuberance, the two extremes of the attitudes towards AI, is that people feel that they cannot do anything, right? If you are fearful, then you want to avoid it. If you're exuberant, then you are kind of projecting a lot of your aspirations, hopes onto AI, right? I think what to me will be a sense of success is really that every person will feel that, yes, I can understand AI. I can, if I don't understand it, a lot about it, I can learn more. And I can join the conversation about how to make AI work for the benefit of humanity.
And so I would just recommend everyone to go and take a look at your book, AI for Humanity, Building a Sustainable AI for the Future. So Siok, many thanks for coming on the show. So in closing, two quick questions. The first one, any recommendations that have inspired you recently?
Yes, I would recommend two books. One is a fiction book and one is a non-fiction. One is called Clara and the Sun. It's a novel by he won the Nobel for many years ago, and it's a very poignant reflection on the relationship, human robotic relationship. Right? It's like it's not about AI taking over the world, but it's really about loneliness, a sense of alienation, and how we come to terms with ourselves and coexist with robots and machines. The other book is Dr. Fei Li's. Many of you know her as the godmother of AI. She wrote a memoir I would recommend because I think although you think that you'll be it is a best-selling book and very celebrated, but what I find interesting is that when I read the book with my book club with both Asian and West American and women from different cultures, is that it's surprisingly contentious because some people were upset with her because she was not critical enough about AI. And then, other people like me, I feel more empathetic towards her sense of her point of view, her sense of history, her reluctance to be overtly critical or skeptical or contentious. So I recommend her book as well, Dr. Fei Li's memoir. So Clara and the Sun, and I think it's the world's.
It's called The World I Know.
The One I Know, yeah, that's right. Her book.
So how can my audience find you?
Thankfully, I have very easy to remember name. My name is Siok Siok Siok. So if you search Siok Siok on any of the social media platform, LinkedIn, Twitter, I'll be there. Instagram, you'll find me. So yeah, you just search for my name. It means to cherish. So I hope to connect with you online. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, you can definitely find a podcast anywhere. Search our YouTube channel and of course go to our main site. And Siok, many thanks for coming on the show and having this conversation on AI. I think good luck with the book, of course, and we will catch up again soon.
Thanks for having me. It's a wonderful chat. Thank you. Thanks so much.